Welcome back to Boy X. We are actually going to skip pages 127 to 130. Ash and Isabel are walking through the jungle to the point where they can cross the river, and Ash makes sure that Isabel knows that his number one priority is getting the cure for his mom and Isabel and her dad, not necessarily stopping Pierce. So on page 131, we are at 18 hours and 28 minutes until shutdown. Excuse me. Ash had been hoping for a bridge, but what he got was a rope and a small wooden cradle. Seriously? He looked at the contraption that was swinging for several feet out over the river. We have to use this? The rope stretched from one side of the river to the other, looping back again and passing through a pulley at each side. The pulley was secured to the trunks of stout trees on opposite banks, more than 30 feet above the level of the water, attached by cords to the top loop of the rope that was what looked like a wooden pallet from a builder's yard. 5 planks laid side by side and fixed in place by thicker pieces of wood nailed to the bottom. The only thing that made it look any different from something that might be used to stack bricks was that someone had attached a small handrail to 2 opposing sides. So I've drawn a picture to help you picture that, because I'm sure the only thing you miss more than my smiling face is my lovely drawings on the whiteboard. So here we have the river and the trees, and this is the rope attaching the 2 trees going across the river, and Isabel and Ash, yep, that's Isabel and Ash, see, there they are on the cradle, which is just a piece of wood on a rope hanging over this other rope. Okay, so that's how they're getting across the river. Woo! Sorry about that, dropped the phone. All right, is it even safe? Of course. Isabel clambered up the bank to the tree where the rope was secured. She climbed up onto a rock, grabbed the rope, and began hauling it hand over hand, bringing the cradle toward her. Come, help me. Isabel was sick and weakening, but she showed no fear. Ash knew that he should do the same, be strong for her. So he joined her on the rock and tried to grab the platform as it came nearer. At first it swung out of reach, but when it swung back, he managed to snatch it and pull it close. Hold it while I get on, Isabel said. But as soon as she jumped up and put any weight on the cradle, it started swaying like crazy. Steady, she shouted as she brought one knee up onto the wood. The whole contraption was swinging back and forth against Ash, threatening to bash him in the head and knock him off the boulder. But he struggled on and managed to bring the cradle under control so Isabel could climb up and shuffle over to the far side. When she was settled, she looked at Ash as if it had been the easiest thing in the world. Now you. She patted the space beside her. Together? Will it hold us? Isabel shook her head like she didn't understand. Are you sure we can both get on this together? He said. Don't you think we're too heavy? You and me are just kids. We're not so heavy. Ash studied the cables holding the cradle suspended beneath the rope. Then he looked at the speed of the water as it thundered past, swollen by the rain running off the mountain. But that wasn't the only thing that made him reach for the comfort of the tag around his neck. Here on the bank, the cradle was at head height, but over the center of the river, it would be suspended more than 30 feet above it. Ash wondered if he'd rather face Thorn or hang high above the raging river. You sure this is a good idea? We'll be quicker together, Isabel said. There's no other way to cross. Ash tore his eyes from the water and looked up to see her watching him. Is it the height? She asked. Yeah, the height. It's good there aren't any small dogs, Isabel joked. But Ash didn't smile. So she frowned and became serious. The river will be like this for hours. There is no other way. Right, yeah. He reached up to grab the lip of the platform. It dipped as soon as he put any weight on it and began to swing and rotate, first one way, then the other. Ash used all of his strength to keep from falling off as he kicked his feet in midair, dragging himself on board, where there was just enough room for them to sit side by side, wedged between the handrails. So they struggle, they're pulling their way across the river. Skip to page 136, the first full paragraph there at the top. When they were almost over the middle of the river, Ash summoned the courage to glance back and see how far they had come. "Feels like we've been doing this for ages," he shouted, "but it doesn't look like we've come very far." Isabel shifted to look over her shoulder. "A few more minutes and we'll be on the other side." A flurry of birds burst from the trees on the bank behind them, flitting out across the water and turning to fly downriver. "What was that?" Isabel asked. "Just birds." "No," she said. "Something made them fly up. You can see better than me. Look in the trees where the birds came out." Ash shifted his attention from the distant birds and scanned the line of the jungle, seeing a wall of green and brown swaying in the breeze that followed the storm. There was an odd splash of red or yellow where flowers were growing, but other than that, I don't see any. Then he saw it. Close to the place where a branch forked from a tree of a large, dark tree. He narrowed his eyes. "Is that? My God, it's a face. Someone's watching us." "A face?" Thorn. As soon as the word was on his lips, Ash knew it was true. Thorn was out there. He had caught up with them, and he was watching them from the forest. "But how?" Isabel said. "We left no tracks. Why follow us and not Cain?" "Makes no difference. We have to get moving." Ash pulled harder on the rope, forgetting about the height and the raging river below. The platform tipped forward, but he didn't waste time trying to keep balanced. He tugged again, dragging them farther along the rope, closer to the far bank. Isabel steadied herself and grabbed the rope, trying to pull in time with him, but finding it impossible to match his speed and strength. "We'll cut it," she said, panting. "When we reach the other side, he can't follow then." "You're sure there's no other way across?" Ash felt exposed and vulnerable, dangling over the river. If Thorn had a rifle, he could easily pick them off. Or maybe he would cut the rope and let the river take them. "Not here," Isabel said between breaths. "Only way is to swim, but the current is too strong now." Ash continued to grab and pull. Isabel continued trying to keep up. The cradle swung backward and forward as they moved. Progress was slow, but they were sliding over the center of the current, passing the halfway point. Grab and pull. Ash glanced back to see if Thorn was still there, but it was difficult to tell. The cradle was swinging almost out of control, and he was only making it worse with his frantic attempts to reach the other side. Grab and pull. The fixings groaned once more, and the cradle came to a sudden stop. "Dios!" Isabel shouted, looking up and pulling hard again. The cradle refused to budge, though, and instead tilted forward with a violent lurch. They both slipped down the damp wood, digging their boot heels into the slats, trying to find a decent grip. "It's jammed," Ash said, and his first thought was that it had something to do with Thorn. But when he looked back, there was no one on the bank, and he could no longer see the face among the trees. "Harder!" Isabel shouted, giving the rope another tug. Once again, the cradle lurched forward, and she leaned back, digging her heels in to keep aboard. "Stop!" Ash said. "You're going to tip us over." "We must pull harder," Isabel insisted. "This happened before." "You sure?" "Yes, pull harder and it will come free." Ash tightened his grip on the rope. "All right, on 3. Isabel nodded. 1, 2, 3. They leaned back and pulled as hard as they could. "We moved," Ash said. "I'm sure we moved." Again, one more time. They secured their grip once more, and Isabel counted off again. 1, 2, 3. The rope remained stubborn for a second. Then it released with a suddenness that made Ash and Isabel drop back with a jolt. The rope slid through their hands and the cradle moved forward. Yes! Isabel looked at Ash with triumph. The cradle dropped more than an inch. Isabel's eyes widened and she stared at Ash for a second before they lifted their gaze to the rope from which the cradle was suspended. It had begun to sag under their weight. "No!" Isabel said. Then it snapped.